today's topic, the Africa we want, I'll be providing a perspective, a youth perspective of the demographic dividend and the HIV response. I'll provide you first with an introduction of the demographic dividend. I'll thereafter move on, try to link the demographic dividend to HIV. Ultimately, I'll move on to speak about the issues around the possibility of achieving the demographic dividend given the HIV response. You may probably know that HIV affects populations. What you also know, or what you would like to know, is that HIV affects the ability for a continent to attain the demographic dividend. So let's get to the bottom of this. So, understanding the demographic dividend, we must begin by understanding the population that exists. And further on, knowing that we must understand the demographic transition that exists for all countries. So, the world population today stands at 7.2 billion people, Africa making up 1.1 billion of the global population. It is estimated that 70% of this population is aged below 30. Furthermore, approximately a third of this population is aged between 10 and 24 years. Alas, we conclude that population in Africa is pretty young. This slide shows us that the African population as a percentage of the globe is increasingly getting bigger, as well as younger. So, in 2000, the population of Africa was 13% of the world's population. In 2050, this population increased to 20%, and 24% in a time I can't even explain well, 2100. What we notice here is actually that Africa population is increasing. However, beyond 2050, the population starts to increase at a reducing population growth rate. So despite this increase, we know that the population will start to reduce its increase. So the demographic transition is something that I would just like to explain by using the model itself, which is an interaction of three variables: the birth rate, the death rate, and the rate of natural increase. So the demographic transition has four stages. Some academics may say 5 because there is a 5th stage, but not many countries have got to that. So I'll stick to the 4. In the first stage, we have high birth rates and high death rates, which result in a high stationary population growth rate. So moving on to the second stage, the population or the death rate starts to decrease. As the death rates increase and the birth rate is sustained, we have an increase or an exponential increase in population. We have stage 3, where we have the birth rate which starts to also follow suit with the death rate. And at this point, we start to reduce the rate of national increase. I'm assuming this is where we are with our response now with the HIV and Africa. So, just to give you or drive this point home, countries such as South Africa, Mozambique, Morocco sit in stage 3. Countries such as most of the sub-Saharan Africa sit in stage 2. To further understand the demographic transition is for us to understand further what the population pyramid is. The population pyramid provides us with 3 categoric distinctions of the aging population above 65, who are the aging dependent, and then below 15, who are the age dependent, as well as the productive age group. So within the stages of the demographic transition, the age group between 15 to 64 will either increase or decrease depending on the rates of births and deaths in a population. So, to get a population that is likely to attain a demographic dividend, we need us to have a population that has reducing fertility, decreasing birth rates, as well as increased population within that age group. So, by definition, the demographic dividend is the accelerated economic growth that can be attained in a population based on the population factors, including the change in age structure. As already mentioned, this is characterized by the falling fertility rate, the declining mortality rate, as well as, well, these two will suffice for now. So one other issue that is important to mention is this slide, that the demographic dividend is not an automated or automatic to be achieved. And this is what other leaders tend to think, that once we talk about it, once we have a youth bulge, a young population in our places, we achieve the demographic dividend. Not at all. So, moving on, this is an example of Thailand, showing the reduction in fertility and the increase in the GDP. The reason I'm using Thailand and not an African country is that the majority of the research that was done around the demographic dividend started in the tigers in Asia. With the massive reductions in fertility, reductions in mortality resulted in an increase in GDP. We assume that if we as Africa take this path, we also would attain the same level of GDP per capita growth. Going back to the investments that are required for us to attain the demographic dividend, given that it's not an automatic or given to us on a silver platter, there must be significant investments in health that look at reproductive health services. There must be significant investments in governance, which ensure that there's limited corruption and policies that suit the people there. There must be investments in economy, ensuring that there are economic trade policies that suit the young population in the country, as well as education, quality education for young girls, including tertiary education and primary education. Trying to link HIV with the demographic dividend is to begin by trying to link HIV with the population and how it affects the population. First of all, we know that it will affect the population at 3 stages, or 3 types of ways that it would affect the population. There's the demographic and health effects of HIV. There's the social and economic effects of HIV, as well as the impact of HIV on women. So, on the demographic population, or how HIV affects the demographic populations, according to statistics from last year, we know that 25 million people are living with HIV on the continent. 1.4 were new infections. Of course, we can be very glad that from the year 2000 to 2014, there was a 41% decrease in the new infections. In terms of people that have died to HIV-related diseases, it stands at 790,000. So the impact there, or the point to draw there, is that HIV affects population by reducing life expectancy. And further on, we can say that HIV affects the concentrated age group within the productive age group, which is between 15 and 45. So, hence affecting the amount of people that are being in the productive sector who can take care of the dependent 2 sectors. So, we know that HIV also impacts on societies and economies. At household level, with the high concentration of deaths existing within the 15 to 64 age group, means that grandparents take care of their children. So it's the aging dependent taking care of the young dependent. We know that there are effects on the healthcare system of how the resources are shifted from other diseases in the population to looking at sorting HIV. We know that it affects business and agriculture and economic stability as well of countries. Ultimately, the impact of HIV on women in Africa is one of the most critical reproductive health concerns of our time. This is because 59% of adults living with HIV are women. More so, young women between the age of 15 and 24 are 2 to 6 times as likely to be infected than their male counterparts. Of course, research, as we have heard throughout this conference, alluded to the biological reasons, the cultural factors, as well as the economic factors. I hope I have made the link between the two at this point. And if not, this slide will help us to see this. So reductions in AIDS-related deaths, reductions in new infections, and discrimination would ultimately tilt the balance and ensure that countries achieve economic growth. So from the previous slide to this slide, I have picked out new infections just to drive the point home. That young people around new infections are required to be taken care of around the prevention of mother to child. Young people's needs are also supposed to be focused according to what they require within their societies. Access to sexual reproductive health services for both male and females. And key populations need their services and their rights to be observed. So, as I get to the close of my presentation, I would like to bring up 3 points here. What key interventions are required to ensure that young people or the HIV response would ensure that we attain the demographic dividend? 3 questions are there for us to see. First of all, who are the youth? Secondly, what do they need? Thirdly, what environments must be set for them to realize the demographic dividend? I'll start with the first one. So, I think the first thing that we need to think about is the data revolution and ensure that there's disaggregated data for young people. What does data do for us? Data ensures that it defines young people as they are, that young people are not a homogeneous society and are a diverse society. Thereafter, we must be able to listen to the voices of young people within their diversity. These are voices of young people that can ensure that we implement the right needs that they have for responding to the HIV epidemic. These voices include young sex workers, young drug users, young men who sleep with men, young migrants, and young people living with HIV. I stand in solidarity with these young people in their diverse nature, and we should all stand in solidarity with them if we are to achieve the demographic dividend. The next question is, what do we need to do? So what do they need? Young people across the continent need universal access to reproductive health services. The question is, have they not received it? Yes, they have. Is it youth-friendly? Maybe not. That's where the answer lies. So we need to ensure that young people have access to youth-friendly services that are comprehensive and tailor-made to suit their diverse needs. Young people also need to be involved. Need to be involved not only in ticking boxes that young people were in this meeting, but young people can also provide or can be an avenue of service provision. I think as Michelle Sidiberg had mentioned during the beginning or the opening ceremony, was that we should view young people not only as beneficiaries, but also as agents of change, determinants of change. And to do so is to ensure that you and we provide young people with the skills necessary to be in health facilities, to be in decision making, and also to stand before you and speak about young people. Lastly, what environment must be set? The right socio-political framework must be set. These are laws and policies that ensure that young people's goals and aspirations in fighting against HIV are set. For example, we have the SDGs, and we know that it provides a lot of issues that can be addressed, and therefore countries must adhere to that. Goal 3 and 5 will address issues such as child marriages, reductions of infant mortality and child mortality, provision of reproductive rights and services. In my conclusion, I would like to say, I have a dream that we will once attain the demographic dividend. I have a dream that one day this continent will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold this truth to be self-evident in Africa, that men and women are created equal. I have a dream that one day, even Africa, a continent swelling with the heat of stigma and discrimination, swelling with the heat of gender-based violence, will be transformed as an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. I have a dream that my LGBT brothers and sisters will one day live in this continent where they will not be judged by their sexuality, but their content of a character. I have a dream today of the Africa I want. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Munyati, for an inspiring and such an important presentation. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Evidence Gaka, for the next plenary session.
It is an honor for me to introduce to you